Hello, my name's Anara. After our dog Buddy passed, my husband said I was too calm, too composed. He said I wasn't grieving right. So he destroyed my studio, my bowls, my urn, everything I ever made with my hands, gone. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, he removed my name from our mortgage, stole my artwork, put his name on my pain. But the worst part? My own sister helped him do it. Is this still grief? Or something else entirely? The funeral was quiet, too quiet for Buddy. People whispered, their shoes barely scuffing the gravel path to the community center where we were holding his memorial. Sunlight filtered through the adobe archways and painted warm shadows on the brick floor. I stood near the door for a while, holding the urn the crematory sent, temporarily, they said. Kellen insisted on doing a full display for Buddy. He was family, he told me that morning, as if I didn't already know. Inside, tables lined with flowers and a few framed photographs of Buddy gave the room a kind of artificial reverence. I saw our neighbors, some old friends from the rescue shelter, even folks from the gallery downtown. Everyone nodded politely when they passed me. Some hugged Kellen. Then the lights dimmed. A projector flickered on. The slideshow began with a song Kellen probably picked, some soft acoustic track with lyrics about home and loss. Photos of Buddy filled the wall. Him as a puppy, him chasing a frisbee, curled up beside the fireplace. One after another, snapshots played out like a story. But I wasn't in a single one, not one photo of me holding Buddy when I first brought him home from the shelter, not the one where I wrapped his injured paw after his surgery, not even the candid Kellen took last Christmas, where Buddy laid his head on my knee during dinner. I stood there, breath still, watching Kellen's voiceover kick in. Buddy came into our lives when we needed him most. I was lucky to have him. A couple behind me whispered, wasn't she the one who adopted the dog? Their tone was innocent enough, but it lodged into me like a shard. I didn't cry, I didn't even blink, but something cold settled just under my ribs. Later, while Kellen shook hands and laughed softly with a couple of business contacts, yes, he brought people from his nonprofit, I slipped out. No one noticed. Not even Isolde, my sister, who'd spent the last week reassuring me that Kellen was just grieving differently. I drove straight home, parked behind the studio, and sat in the car until the engine ticked cold. Buddy's old leash was still looped on the gear stick. I reached out and ran my fingers over the worn leather. It felt like touching a scar. Inside, the house was too still. I placed the urn on the kitchen counter, hesitated, then carried it into my studio, the only room that still felt like mine. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old album, flipping to a page I hadn't looked at in months. There it was, me and Buddy, the day I brought him home, his ears too big for his head, mine tucked under a knit hat. I tucked the photo into the back cover, scribbled a line beneath it. He was mine, even when I was silent. I wasn't sure what felt worse, that I had to write it or that I knew no one else would. The next morning, I called Dr. Jensen's office to settle the final bill. The receptionist paused, then asked if I was calling to confirm the cancellation. Cancellation? I repeated. Yes, she said gently. Your husband called the night before Buddy's appointment, said plans had changed, that you both decided not to go through with it. I stood in the kitchen, heart thudding. We'd made that decision together, at least I thought we had. I made the call. I'd sat up with Buddy all night. I'd made him scrambled eggs when he stopped eating kibble, but Kellen canceled the appointment without telling me, without even asking. He was rewriting the story, from the slideshow to the vet records. I leaned against the counter, dizzy for a moment. Then I walked back to the studio, sat at the wheel, and pressed my hands into the cool, untouched clay. Maybe I grieve too quietly, or maybe someone doesn't want me to grieve at all. I had just scribbled those words into my notebook the night before, the studio dim with grief and the scent of clay still lingering in the air. When I woke, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window like it always had, soft and quiet, almost too gentle for the weight sitting in my chest. I opened my phone to track the delivery. Buddy's ashes were arriving that morning. I had called the crematory myself 3 days prior and told them I didn't want a generic container. I'd made a special urn, cobalt glaze, hand-thrown, smooth around the rim where I'd etched a single line. Good boy, always. It was waiting in the studio. It was the one place Kellen hadn't touched, yet. I heard the van pull up just after 9. The driver rang the doorbell, handed me a cardboard box, and walked off with a polite nod. It felt wrong, too ordinary for something sacred. I set the box down carefully on the kitchen table. My hands moved slowly, deliberate, as if the wrong motion might undo everything. I peeled the tape back, layer by layer, until the lid gave way and revealed something that made my heart sink. It was not my urn. What stared back at me was a smooth, factory-made white porcelain container with silver trim. A synthetic lavender sachet was tucked beneath the lid. It smelled like pottery and hospital rooms. I stood still for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then I picked up the phone and called the crematory. "Ma'am," the woman on the line said, her voice tight with practiced sympathy, "your husband requested a simplified package. He said the handcrafted piece was no longer necessary." No longer. I couldn't even finish the sentence. My fingers clenched the edge of the table. "I asked for the custom urn. I gave you the studio name. I signed for it." "Yes, but he called after you. Said there'd been a change of plans, that you were overwhelmed." I hung up without saying goodbye. That afternoon, Kellen came home around 3. I was in the kitchen, the urn sitting in plain view. He took off his shoes like nothing happened. "I saw the delivery came," he said, glancing at it. "Simple, right? Clean lines, doesn't scream drama." I stayed silent. He stepped closer. "Look, I know you had your heart set on that pottery thing, but honestly, you were too deep in it. You needed rest." I didn't reply. I just watched him, this man who had made himself the center of a story he didn't start. "It's just an urn, Anara. Don't get symbolic on me." I walked past him and grabbed my keys. By the time I reached the studio, the sun had started sinking behind the trees. I needed to be surrounded by something I made. I needed to remember that I still had a voice, even if no one was listening. But when I punched in the keypad, nothing happened. I tried again. The red light blinked. Again. Red. I stepped back and stared at the door, suddenly feeling a pressure behind my eyes. I didn't cry, not yet. I called Kellen. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said, casual as ever. "The keypad," I said. "You changed it." "Yeah," he said, not even trying to hide it. I was worried. That place keeps you stuck. You need to let it go, Anna. You need to let him go. You locked me out. I'm protecting you. No, Kellen. You're erasing me. Silence. I hung up. I drove around for a while after that, through side streets I used to walk with Buddy, past houses where he'd sniffed the same patches of grass like they were brand new. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot outside the local arts center. I didn't go in. I just sat there until the sky turned to ash. When I got back home, I carried the factory urn to the studio window and placed it just inside the sill. I sat on the floor beside the window, knees to chest, staring at the empty wheel and the unused glaze jars. He wouldn't have wanted this. I reached for my notebook, opened to a blank page, and began to write. Just one line. "If they won't let me mourn, I'll make mourning my art." The bowl came together in silence, my fingers shaping the clay slowly, methodically. I didn't rush it. Every curve, every thumbprint in the wet surface carried a breath I hadn't been allowed to release since Buddy passed. I wasn't sculpting a bowl. I was sculpting the only piece of calm I could still control. I had snuck into the studio through the back door 3 nights before, using a backup key I never admitted I'd kept. Kellen had changed the keypad code, locked me out like I was some unstable squatter in my own sanctuary. But he forgot about the old brass key hidden in the flower pot. Once inside, the air felt heavier, undisturbed, and yet like it had been waiting for me. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. A single floor lamp beside the workbench was enough. I kept my coat on, rolled up my sleeves, and sat at the wheel. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't listen to music. I didn't talk to Buddy like I used to. I just worked. Each evening after that, I came back. I started sculpting pieces of him, his paw resting on a favorite toy, the tilt of his ear when he listened to rain. Not literal likenesses, but the essence of him, captured in shape and line. By the 3rd night, I'd filled the shelf with 8 pieces, a set I called Still Here. The 4th night, I walked in and stopped cold. The shelf was empty, the clay bins, saturated as if someone had poured water into them until the contents dissolved into gray sludge. My sketches were torn and scattered, footprints dried into the spilled slip on the floor. I stood there for a long time, not moving, not breathing. Then I stepped toward the workbench, lifted one damp piece of paper, and read the line Kellen had once praised. Grief is a language we shape with our hands. A new line had been scribbled beneath it. Wallowing isn't healing. That was his handwriting. When I got home, he was in the living room, scrolling on his phone with one leg crossed over the other, like he hadn't just vandalized my world. "You destroyed my work," I said quietly. He didn't look up. "I saved you from it." I didn't move. "You think grief is something you can manage, like a budget." He sighed, finally looking up. "Anara, I'm trying to help you. That place is toxic. You're stuck. That studio is killing you." "No," I said. "It's the only thing keeping me from disappearing." He didn't speak after that, and I didn't need him to. That weekend, I decided to try something I hadn't in weeks. Invite my family over. Just a small dinner, nothing big. I cleaned the house, put fresh sunflowers in the vase Buddy used to sniff every morning. I made his favorite stew. Yes, I made a dog's favorite stew for humans. The same carrots and beef I used to cook for him when he was too old to chew dry food. I set the table for 5s. Just me, Isolde, our younger cousin, and 2 aunts who lived nearby. I figured if anyone would understand how much of Buddy was wrapped into the way I lived, it would be them. I lit candles. I wore the blue sweater my mom had given me last Christmas. 6 o'clock came, then 6:30. By 7, the stew was lukewarm. The flowers had started to droop a little under the candlelight. My phone buzzed. A text from Isolde. "Hey, Kellen mentioned you've been having a hard time. We thought it might be too soon. Didn't want to upset you." Upset me. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I placed my phone down and walked into the kitchen. I packed the stew into containers, one by one, labeling them like I used to when Kellen complained about space in the fridge. I wiped the counters, turned off the lights, and sat at the end of the table, staring at the empty chairs like they might fill themselves if I just waited long enough. But no one came. Because no one believed I could hold space for my own pain without making a mess of theirs. "If they think silence means weakness," I whispered, more to the room than to myself, "maybe I should show them what silence can do." I didn't check my phone until morning. I'd fallen asleep on the cold floor of the studio, my notebook still open beside me. When I finally dragged myself up, bones stiff and back sore, I noticed the flashing notification. 3 missed calls from Dr. Jensen's office. A single email sat beneath them with the subject line, "Rescheduling required." I clicked it open. The wording was vague, clinical. "Due to internal review, we are requesting all future sessions be rescheduled pending reassessment of care plan." No mention of why or when they'd be available again. No apology. I called twice. No answer. No voicemail. By the afternoon, my unease had curdled into something darker. Suspicion. I pulled on a hoodie, threw my hair into a messy knot, and drove straight to the clinic without calling ahead. I told the receptionist I just needed to speak with Dr. Jensen briefly. She gave me a brittle smile and disappeared into the hallway. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she returned. "She's not available right now," the receptionist said, "but she did leave a note for you." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a typed memo. Dr. Jensen's tone was distant, guarded. It said she had received additional input from a concerned party, and in light of that, she was reevaluating the direction of my sessions. That was all I needed. I drove home without turning on the radio, heart thudding with every mile. The concerned party didn't need a name. Kellen had gotten to her. Somehow, someway, he'd turned my therapist, my last neutral space, into another extension of his narrative. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the garage door. Eventually, I remembered something, the old iPad. It was tucked in the back of my closet, mostly unused, still synced to the family account. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe longer. Inside, I dug it out, dusted off the screen, and plugged it in. It took a moment to boot up. I wasn't expecting much, maybe some old photos of Buddy, a few saved recipes, but the Messages app opened automatically, and there it was. A thread between Kellen and Isolde. I scrolled. "She's spiraling. You know how emotional she gets." "I know. I told her to try therapy again. She needs to feel monitored right now." More messages followed. Dozens. Conversations behind my back, dissecting my behavior like I was a specimen on a slide. "She's not handling Buddy's death. She's just making it worse on herself." "Yeah, I saw some of the stuff in the studio. It's a little disturbing." I stopped breathing for a second. Isolde had been in the studio? When? It wasn't just Kellen. I set the iPad down carefully, as though it might break louder than I could bear. It was one thing to be betrayed by a husband trying to salvage his public image, but your own sister, using your words, your grief, as ammo? I didn't scream. I didn't sob. I went to the sink, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing still. Then I walked into the living room, sat on the armrest of the couch, and called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Anna." "Don't," I said. Silence on her end. I kept my voice even. "From now on, if you really care about me, even a little, you'll stay out of my way." "Anna, listen. No. No more explanations. No more excuses. You had one job. Just to be honest with me, not whatever this was. You don't understand what it's like watching you unravel." "I'm not unraveling, Isolde. I'm mourning. You're just too afraid of messy feelings to tell the difference." Another pause. "I was just trying to help." "Then stop helping." I ended the call, not abruptly, not with anger, just closed the line. It was late by then, the sky starting to bleed into twilight. I returned to the studio, unlocked the back door, and stepped inside. I didn't turn on the light. I sat down cross-legged on the floor, right where I'd been the night before, and placed my phone in front of me. I tapped the voice recorder. "They want proof I'm broken," I said quietly, the words echoing against clay-stained walls. "Let's give them a story they'll remember." I stood in front of the gallery wall, staring at my work, but it wasn't my name underneath. It was his. Kellen's name, bold and centered, on the white placard like he'd spent hours at the wheel, like those ridges and grooves had passed through his hands. I stepped closer, heart rattling against my ribs, and read the full line. "Inspired by the grieving journey with his late dog." Below that, a quote, "Art is how we survive our pain. Sometimes it's how we redeem it." Kellen Marsh from Moving Through the Morning, his new blog apparently. The lighting in the gallery was soft and amber-toned, like they wanted to cradle the emotion out of you. A few guests stood nearby, sipping white wine, nodding slowly at the piece. One woman turned to her friend and whispered, "He must have been so close to the dog." I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. I took one of the event brochures from the stack near the door and walked out. No one stopped me. Back at home, I lit the kiln. I stood there in my garage-turned-studio, the brochure curled in my hand. The edges were already sweating from the heat as I dropped it into the chamber. I didn't slam the door. I pressed it closed slowly, then turned the dial up higher than I ever had for a piece of clay. "If my grief is public property," I muttered, "then they'll feel the fire that made it." The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. "Healing through loss, live in 5 minutes. Join Kellen Marsh as he shares his journey and how to help others heal." I sat down at the kitchen table, brewed myself a cup of strong black coffee, and opened the stream. There he was, seated against a bookshelf lined with framed quotes and muted lighting. "Today," he said, "we remember Buddy and the light he brought to our family. His loss broke something in me, but that break, I now realize, was a door opening." He went on. He spoke about resilience, about transforming pain into purpose. He thanked his followers for their support and said his new grief coaching program would be available for sign-up by the end of the week. Then came the video montage. Clips of Buddy, rolling in the grass, chasing bubbles, curling up on the rug. I smiled in spite of myself. But then, a cut to me. Me in the background, blurred slightly, sitting on the edge of the bed holding Buddy's collar. Silent, eyes swollen, broken open. He had taken our private moments, mine and Buddy's, and pasted them into his sales pitch. I closed the laptop so hard the mug on the table rattled. That evening, I reclaimed the studio. I waited until Kellen left for his networking dinner. I'd overheard the details on a call he took with the volume too high. He'd said, "They see me as the face of emotional renewal. I can't mess that up." I drove to the studio with the old brass key in my coat pocket. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel my spine straighten. This was my space, no matter how much he tried to make it otherwise. I took a piece of charcoal from the top shelf, walked to the largest blank wall, and wrote, "You stole my name. Now watch what I make with yours." I stood there a moment, then added one final line underneath. "This won't be yours to spin." The next morning, the words I'd written in charcoal were still hanging in the air of the studio. The sunlight through the high windows caught on the smudges like a spotlight, illuminating every curve of the message. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't angry, it was a promise. By late afternoon, I had a new rhythm. I'd started shaping a fresh series, one that felt sharper, heavier in the hands. The pieces weren't about Buddy anymore. They were about aftermath, about survival. I called it Tarnished. I had just finished trimming a slab when I heard the back door creak open. Kellen. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I let the silence be the first line of defense. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure whether he was welcome. His eyes scanned the space until they landed on the wall where my message still lingered. "So, this is what we're doing now?" he said quietly. Still, I didn't answer. He stepped closer to the shelf, the one I'd rebuilt just 2 days ago. He looked at one of the bowls, a dark glazed piece with uneven ridges meant to feel like scar tissue, and picked it up. "I know you're hurt," he started. His voice dipped in that controlled tone he used when trying to sound reasonable. "But you're turning this into something toxic." I stayed where I was, hands resting on the work table, jaw tight. "You're making this about punishment," he continued. "You're punishing me, punishing yourself. That's not what Buddy would have wanted." He moved toward the center of the room now, past the shelving unit, fingers brushing the edge of my kiln. "You think you're reclaiming something, but what you're really doing is dragging this on. People are starting to notice, Anara." I felt my fingertips curl into the table's edge. And then, like it was the most casual thing in the world, he reached out and shoved the shelf. It collapsed with a crash. The sound wasn't a sharp crack. It was a full-body impact. Ceramic burst across the floor in waves, shards clinking against concrete like broken glass wind chimes. He stood there, calm. "Now you know what real loss feels like." I couldn't breathe for a second. Not from shock, but from the way my body had to fight every instinct to stay upright, to not fly at him with fists or screams. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the record button without a word. Then I stepped past the mess, past him, knelt down, and picked up the one piece that hadn't shattered completely. A bowl, glazed in soft gray, and on the bottom, a paw print. Imperfect, but unmistakably Buddy's. That night, I invited him and Isolde to dinner. I didn't say why. I didn't even cook. I ordered from the Italian place Kellen always used to brag about when he had guests. I set the table, wiped down the wine glasses, and placed that cracked bowl at the center like a centerpiece. They showed up right on time. Isolde smiled a little too tightly when she walked in, her eyes scanning the room like it might be booby-trapped. Kellen made small talk. Something about the local paper running his grief column. I let them talk. Once the plates were cleared, I stood up, walked over to the center of the table, and placed the broken bowl in front of Kellen. He glanced at it, then at me. Nothing was said. He opened his mouth, maybe to deflect, maybe to defend, but I raised a hand, palm flat. "You smashed a studio," I said. "But you didn't silence the artist." His jaw tensed. Isolde looked down at her lap. I turned, picked up the bowl gently, and walked to the front door. "Thank you for coming," I said. "You can see yourselves out." And I left them sitting there, in a room that used to feel like mine. As I stepped into the night air, bowl in hand, I felt something loosen behind my ribs. Not peace, not yet, but something close. The letter was in a plain white envelope with my name misspelled on the front. I found it tucked between a grocery flyer and a charity appeal, like nothing more than junk mail. The return address was from the mortgage company. I didn't think much of it at first. But when I opened it, something in my body braced, like I'd been hit with cold wind. "Dear Miss Marsh," it began, though I hadn't used that name in weeks. "This letter is to confirm the successful revision of your home mortgage account. The primary borrower listed is now Kellen Marsh. All prior co-signatory rights have been legally released, effective retroactively." I read the paragraph 3 times. My name wasn't on the mortgage anymore. He'd taken me off, quietly, legally, without my consent. My hands trembled as I folded the letter, too neatly, like I couldn't let my body reflect what was happening inside my chest. I sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window. The world looked the same, but something had shifted. The ground beneath me felt thinner, like I'd stepped onto a patch of earth someone had hollowed out, waiting for me to fall. By the time dusk rolled in, I found myself in the attic. I don't remember making the decision to go up there. It was like my body moved before my mind caught up. I pulled down the creaky steps and climbed slowly, flashlight in hand. I hadn't touched the memory box since Mom passed. It was buried beneath an old quilt and a box of tangled Christmas lights. I carried it downstairs and sat cross-legged on the floor. Inside were brittle photo prints, graduation cards, and a red velvet ribbon I'd won in 8th grade for a ceramics project. At the very bottom, under a yellowing sheet of tissue paper, I found it. A newspaper clipping, edges curled. It was from my senior year. A photo of me holding a large ceramic dish, smile crooked, hair frizzed from nerves. The caption read, "Local teen wins Southwest Youth Arts Prize." On the back, in my mother's handwriting, faded from years of being folded tight, "No one shapes truth like you do, baby girl." I exhaled. All this time, I thought Kellen had stolen everything. But truth was still mine, always had been. As I dug deeper into the box, another envelope slipped loose. It wasn't labeled, just tucked inside an old birthday card. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, my mother's. I opened it carefully. "Anara," it began. "I know I didn't always say the right things. I didn't always understand your silence, your sadness, the way you carried love in quiet ways. But I saw how you looked at Buddy. I saw how he looked at you. That dog knew he was safe because of you." I blinked back the burn behind my eyes. "I wrote this after that bad week, you remember, when you said you weren't sure anyone saw you anymore. I did. I always did. You give life to things no one else notices. That's a gift. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The letter ended simply. "If this finds you someday, I hope you're still making things with your hands. I hope you remember who you are." I set it beside the newspaper clipping and let myself cry, not from loss, but from being found. Later that night, I laid out the mortgage letter on the kitchen counter, took photos from every angle, zoomed in on the date stamp, the legal line about retroactive consent. Then I opened my laptop and created a folder on my desktop. I labeled it Truth Bomb. I uploaded everything, screenshots, messages, photos of destroyed pottery, the letter from the bank. And in a blank document, I typed the first line of what would eventually be my statement. If they thought grief was weakness, they forgot what grief becomes when it burns. Just as I closed the lid, my email pinged. A gallery assistant I barely remembered from a year ago had replied to a message I hadn't sent. Subject, security footage, your studio body. "Hey, I found something you might want to see. Your ex never deleted the backups." I stared at the screen. I clicked download and pressed play. The footage opened with the studio door creaking wide, Kellen stepping inside like he owned the light that poured in behind him. The timestamp blinked on the corner of the screen. This wasn't some distant memory. It was the night everything broke. He moved with purpose, like he was late to an appointment, not trespassing into someone's soul. No hesitation. He headed straight to the shelf, lifted one of my bowls, studied it for a beat, then dropped it. It shattered off camera. I didn't blink. I didn't pause the video. I watched him work his way through the space, tipping over displays, flipping sketchbooks, knocking tools off their hooks. My favorite kiln, the one I saved for years to buy. He kicked the base and slammed down the lid. And then, when he saw the urn, the one I'd made with my bare hands, the one that held more than just clay, he lifted it, hesitated, and let it fall. The camera caught it all. My hands were cold on the trackpad as I downloaded the file. I rewatched it twice. Then I opened a new email, attached the footage, and typed in two addresses: the editor of the Santa Fe Independent and the program director for the Healing Through Loss Foundation. Subject: for your review. Body: this is what healing looks like when no one's watching. I hit send. It took less than 24 hours. First came the email from the foundation. Effective immediately, Mr. Marsh's participation with our organization is suspended. We will be launching an internal investigation. Then the gallery board posted a short statement online. Due to new information received, we are removing Mr. Marsh's contributions from upcoming exhibitions. By mid-afternoon, the video had made it to a local blog, then Twitter, then Facebook. Comments flooded in. This isn't grief, this is erasure. She built that studio, he wrecked it. Healing doesn't look like destruction. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That evening, my phone rang. Isolde. I let it buzz until it stopped. Then she texted. I saw everything. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry. I locked the screen without answering. Instead, I went back to the studio, what was left of it anyway. The shards still lined the floor in certain places, small splinters of ceramic hiding between baseboards, glinting when the light hit them just right. I knelt down, picked up a handful of broken pieces, and brought them to my workbench. The sculpture took hours. I didn't sketch it first. I didn't measure or calculate. I just let my hands move, fitting fragments together, filling gaps with wire, sealing cracks with gold resin I had bought months ago for something else entirely. When I finished, it stood roughly knee-high. A figure curled forward, hands pressed to chest, torso riddled with visible breaks. I titled it, Proof of Presence. The gallery called 2 days later. We've seen your recent work, the woman said gently. We'd be honored to host your solo exhibit next spring. We're calling it Tarnished True. Are you open to that? I looked around the studio, the pieces, the mess, the beauty and ruin. Yes, I said. I think that title fits just fine. After we hung up, I sat down in front of the sculpture. I printed a small label and taped it beneath the base. I was here, even when you erased me. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and finally allowed myself to feel proud. Not because I'd won, but because I was still standing. And then came the next message. This time, it wasn't a threat or another apology. It was an invitation. The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, tucked inside a deep gray envelope. It was simple, elegant, no flourish, just 4 lines. Anara, we would be honored to feature your solo exhibit next spring. Tarnished True. With admiration, SL, Curator, Tierra Nueva Gallery. I set the envelope down on the table and stared at it. Not with shock, those days were behind me, but with something quieter, like when the wind changes after a long, hard winter. Not warmth, not quite, but the absence of cold. 3 months had passed since Kellen broke the studio. Since I watched him on video smashing what he could not control. Since I turned my grief into a form they could all finally see. Now I was standing in the middle of my new space, a gallery tucked into the foothills just outside Santa Fe. Light spilled through tall, narrow windows. The scent of clay and pinewood still hung in the air. My hands moved with care as I wrapped the final piece for the exhibit. A bowl. Not just any bowl, the bowl. The one that had survived. Buddy's paw print was still etched at the bottom, faint but there. The glaze had cracked around it, hairline fractures catching the light like spider veins. It hadn't needed to be fixed to be whole. I placed it at the center of the first pedestal and stepped back. Word about Kellen faded faster than I expected. People speculated. Some said he moved to Oregon. Others claimed he resigned quietly, citing personal burnout. I didn't follow his trail. I didn't need to. Sometimes justice doesn't scream. It simply walks away and lets silence take over. The opening night came. Slowly, the room filled, not with celebrities or art critics or press, just people, neighbors, students from the community center, friends of friends, a retired couple who had fostered Buddy for 2 weeks before I adopted him. Isolde arrived near the end. She didn't make a scene, didn't ask for forgiveness. She walked through the exhibit like everyone else, head low, eyes still. On her way out, she left something on the bench by the entrance, a single pressed flower, wrapped in wax paper, and a folded note. I opened it later that night. I see now. I was wrong. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. The next morning, I walked through the garden. The sun was just rising, casting gold over the rosemary and lavender. I stopped near the stone corner where Buddy used to curl up beside the grass. There, on a small block of weathered wood, sat the only sculpture of him that survived. I hadn't covered it with glass. I hadn't built a case. I left it exposed because he wasn't meant to be protected from the world. He was meant to live in it, to get muddy, scratched, kissed by rain and sun, because he was real. And real things get scarred. Later that day, I returned to the studio. The space had been cleaned, reorganized. The shelves now held student works, half-finished forms, lumps of clay waiting for shape. A girl no older than 10 walked in with her grandmother. She glanced at the shelves, wide-eyed, then looked at me. "Are we allowed to touch it?" she asked softly. I smiled. "We're allowed to make it." I handed her a small block of clay. Her fingers sank into it without fear. As she worked, I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched in weeks, and wrote, "I'm not whole. I'm not broken. I'm seen." The girl looked up and asked, "What should I make?" I set the journal down, leaned beside her, and said, "Let's see what your hands remember." Some wounds don't need to vanish for healing to begin. Sometimes the cracks, the scars, are where our strength finally shows. Have you ever been told how you should grieve? Or had your silence mistaken for weakness? Let me know your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful family stories like this one. Your voice matters here.